Okay, as per the question I given you this at the beginning of this class, uh, why the need malware has to be or malware have to be categorized into groups. In this regard only, actually, we have to know that the strength of the malware that it when it dominates, but when we categorize the malware into groups, security experts, security appliances, security, let's say, software applications, whatever, whomever is concerned with capturing or detecting or, let's say, blocking malware or malware behavior, uh, they have to actually have the intellectual capability to recognize that this is a malware or not, to classify that the malware is the malware or the process in question is a malware. So, when categorizing malware into groups, it is much more easier to classify a process behavior, whether it is belonging to a smaller group, then it is much more easier than to classify or to detect a process behavior that it belongs to a very wide or big group. So categorizing malware into groups, the first purpose or the first intention is to prevent malicious, let's say, payload deployment. And classifies also it helps to classify the malware into groups based on their level of severity, their impact, targeted frameworks and platforms, and so on. So there are so many reasons, but mainly the first perspective is security-wise, to detect it much more easier and to raise up the level of the detection into an efficient level, a more actually efficient and uh, fruitful level. Okay, as per this unit, immediately this malicious software classification or definition or let's say categorization and presentation, per the terminology, I believe that everything is clear. Just immediately, I'm going to pass to the next level. But before I pass, I want you to be aware that those terminology they are classifying to us some of the security, let's say malicious software, something like that. But you have to be aware to classify them. You between you and you have to be having the capability to classify them into groups. When I ask you from those terminologies here, which ones they describe a virus, which one it describes a worm, which one describes a Trojan, and so on, Trojan horse. So you have to have the capability to yes to recognize the groups or the group to which it belongs each of those. The very common terminologies that we have to recognize is that this is common between all the classified or the categorized malware, whether they are viruses or worms or Trojan horses. There is a payload to be executed by each. There is an scene via which this malware, whatever it is, has succeeded in accessing the environment, and there is a payload reset. Yeah, regardless. And the level of persistency can be seen actually based on some criteria. Mainly, we talk about the obscure level of obscurity that the approach that the malware in question is following, and not only the obscurity or the obscure level or the obscurity mechanism he's following or he's tracking, but also how deep he stays actually asleep in order to be undetectable. Advanced persistent threats, those are groups of malware that they run actually in an obscure way. They access without consent absolutely, and they keep staying asleep until a time comes. And they may stay, actually, they may have the chance to stay asleep for long periods that can reach years without doing anything. You just sleep there inside the environment, and once the time comes, they act. So the common terms here actually mainly, first of all, I will say not the payload of the crime, where it's one of the very those are from the very common terminologies in between all the malware groups. But this is one of the very, let's say, severe kind of malware, which is hard to detect, and once it behaves, it causes a disaster inside the environment. It's one of the very perilous malware, the APT, the Advanced Persistent Threat. The very famous category of malware is the viruses. Category. One virus belongs to the group of viruses. This virus actually, or this category of malware software computer program, actually, it has the capability to infect an environment, and the environment is computer here in this example. So it executes its payload within the computer, within a standalone machine mainly. It can attach itself into a computer program, but it cannot propagate. It cannot propagate to an environment, to a network, for example. So by copying itself, or by attaching itself into computer programs, it can propagate. But by itself, it cannot propagate into another computer, or from within a network media. So it needs actually an event to be launched in order to be executed. The virus is asleep until an event happens. Mainly, it needs a user to click, or it needs a user to open something, something like that. In order to be executed. So, and being executed means the payload is executed. The execution here of a virus at the end of the day is just the execution of the payload. The payload is the list of commands that the virus is intended to do: to conceal, to delete, to hide, yes, to change, to send, to share, to do something actually inside the environment, to destroy, to empty, to format. All of the activities that a virus can do is the concern of a payload that a virus is holding, or is having, or is carrying. So all viruses actually, they have to have capability to replicate itself within the same computer. Yes, because uh, we define from the terminologies, we define the outer root, let's say, uh, scenario. The outer router is the one that generates copies of a virus, generates copies of a virus, the same virus. You thought that you detected and you deleted the virus, but suddenly you find another copy, or you find it again in the same place. How? Because there is an outer router controlling that virus. It is not run by itself. So here we talk about actually the replication. The trigger actually is the event that caused the execution of the payload, caused the virus to execute its payload. A click, a selection, an opening, let's say a sharing, something needs something actually to cause, not needs, something to cause the virus to be executed. A payload is the intention, what the virus has to do. This is what the virus has to do. This is the payload. And this is a very common word that is the concern of every single malware, not only the viruses. A virus can be actually preceding an action, can be coming after an action, post-pending, or can be actually attached to running in parallel with an actual process. The virus can run after running a process, can run if before a process when a process is called, can run along and in parallel with a process. Prepend or prepended, postpend or postpended, embedded means in parallel, along with. You run a process, so the process is affected. Along with it, the virus will be also run, yes. And the invoke, actually, the activity of calling a program, if it is infected, it calls the execution of the payload that the virus is holding. The payload is the commands or the codes that the virus is carrying at the end of the day. So once a program is infected and it has been called, so this causes the virus to be executed. For example, if the Microsoft Office is infected with a macro virus, and we saw that in the lab last class, if the Microsoft Office Word, for example, or Microsoft Office in general, is infected with a macro virus. So opening any document will invoke, will cause the virus attached or the attached virus to be executed also. Means the payload that the virus is having will be executed. The code that the virus is having also will be executed. Actually, initially, if the virus is not detected, it's not easy to block it from the initial view. If the virus is already infecting an environment or infecting a solution, and originally, if he after actually he is infecting the environment and it's not detected, it's not easy to detect it and to stop his propagation. It has to propagate. It has to cause a damage or something to bring the attention of the security appliances. Otherwise, we keep doing its task without being recognized. Here's the level of severity where we can see the virus in action. He actually means that if a virus actually is not being detected and once it was launched, so it can reach the resources without any access control mechanism or any request to access the resource. It will reach since it is not detected. Whatever about the example. Actually, viruses attaches the viruses they do attach them itself into a process. So here, the compression virus is an example, and it attaches itself into a process to be a traveler. It attaches itself into a process to be able to travel across the network or across the platform from an environment to another. Okay, based on the behavior, based on the functionality, we are classifying the viruses here. Here we talk about the viruses classification, not the malware classification. Virus classification. So the category virus from the malware is still, again, it is classified in two groups. And this classification is based on the behavior, what the virus do, or what the virus does to belong to this group or to the other. Boot sector, actually, it is one of the very famous, let's say, infected, we can say, locations or platforms or let's say destinations by boot viruses. A boot sector, actually, it is the sector, the first sector in the hard disk where the operating system stores its MBR, master boot record, which to be utilized to launch or to load the operating system once the computer is turned on. So the boot sector will be infected, means the MBR, the master boot record, will be infected. And this master boot record, originally it is used to load the operating system from the hard disk into the RAM. If it is infected, so it will not do its role as it has to. But the infection of this MBR is using a boot sector or a boot virus, boot sector virus or boot virus. File infector. This is actually the very common category of the viruses, which are the COM or the exe files. COM viruses or exe executable files. One of them, they are called the file infectors because they are utilized to be utilized, actually to be run after a click or after actually an invoking of this exe file, but it is to infect an environment file by file. And originally it is a file. Exe file is a file. COM file, it's a file. So this view or this way, it is gaining its name, file infector. File infector. Macrovirus. This is a categorized group of viruses which are generated using the VBA, Visual Basic for Applications, and mainly they are to run across the Microsoft Office pack tools. A macrovirus, it's a virus that runs across all the Microsoft Office tools. So you start for example, the Microsoft Word, and the virus Word is infected with the macro. The Word, the Excel, the PowerPoint, the Publisher, all the Microsoft Office pack tools installed in your computer are also infected with the same macrovirus, because the macrovirus do infect the full Office pack, not only one of the applications. They are centralized already. Multi-party is one of the groups that describes a virus that do infects a multitude of destinations. And this multitude of destinations using different techniques, multiple ways. Multitask, sort of multitask actually behavior. The first actually description of a virus, what it does, from the intention, what the virus do, what the virus does inside the computer. It conceals data. What does it mean? It will make actually concealment. It will cause the data to be hidden. It will cause the data to be encrypted somehow in some scenarios and won't be actually retrieved. If it is ransomware attack, it will call for a ransom in order to return back the original media. So by concealment, it's one of the scenarios. The concealment is one of the payloads intentions the virus is carrying. Concealment. Examples of viruses that they do this context of concealment: the encryption, let's say, the encrypted virus or the encryption-based virus. Stealth virus, which another one. Encryption means actually it is the one that do encrypt resources. Stealth virus, it's one of the very famous viruses that they do hide itself from being exposed, and it does execute itself, execute the payload carrying. But originally, it has to hide itself from being exposed. Stealth virus, stealth virus. Polymorphic and metamorphic, they are actually viruses that they do regenerate themselves, generate copies from themselves, and a high, let's say, level. They do encrypt the content. They do hide themselves from being detected. They regenerate the content perfectly, and so on. So what's the difference? The difference is that when we talk about metamorphic and polymorphic actually it is to do an encryption and actually to regenerate even the signature of, let's say, a destination. Means if it gets regenerated, the signature will be regenerated with a different value. Another signature will be assigned to the virus, which is classified to be a polymorphic virus. But for the metamorphic virus, it will do the same thing. It will be able to regenerate and encrypt its content, and it will be able to regenerate another copy from itself. But the regeneration here, it would include the signature and the behavior both. How it looks like. The signature, let's say, who is it? Let's say. And the behavior, here we talk about what does this virus do exactly. So behavior. There is the list of the commands. What does it do? Metamorphic virus. Okay. One step further, another category from the virus is the macro viruses. It's a very common one nowadays, and nowadays we can see it actually spread. And the macro viruses, the macro solutions, they are mainly computer programs that they are not intended to be malicious computer programs. They did not have the intention at the beginning to develop a malicious solution to detect such an example, the malware, which is the you talk about the macros, no more or less. They are actually related to the Microsoft Office, yes, absolutely, but in the sense of they do not mean that they are actually to be successful every time being executed. Why? Because originally they are a technology enhancing the behavior of the Office solution, whether it is a Microsoft Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Access, Public, whatever. All of them they are supporting the Mac. Why? Because the Mac is intended to run on top of each and to enhance the behavior and the user experience using those tools. They are successful and they are actually a very periculous technology. Yes, once it is utilized in a negative way, it means the macros they are not malware. When you say only a macro, hey, I'm sending you a macro, for example, like you, my students, I'm sending you a macro. The macro is not a virus. The macro is a solution to incorporate somewhere. But if I'm telling you that I'm sending you a macro virus to check or a macro program to check its behavior or its negative behavior. So we are defining a virus, a kind of a virus. So originally the macros they are not viruses. The macros they are not viruses. Remember that. But once utilized in a negative way, so even if the intention only is negative, so it is here defined in a macro virus. And those macro viruses they are not nowadays. They are not enabled nowadays, so easily to be detected by the Office tool only and be eliminated. So you run a macro virus from Microsoft Office Word. If I send it to you, for example, and you download it, you'll not be able to. Oh, sorry, not it's not you. This macro virus will not be able to run because the Office will block that macro virus. So it will not be having the chance to run. Why? Because by default, the Office pack is blocking those malware, those kind of malware. Yeah, it means they are exposed. Those macrobytes, they are not successful nowadays. They are not successful viruses nowadays. But still they are dangerous. They are dangerous. Means they do not actually, they are not eliminated once for all from the technological framework, from the scene. No, still they are available and still they are to be considered. By whom? By the antiviruses. Email virus is one of the very famous also kind of a viruses. Recently, defined, recently defined, because they are coming with the email solutions only, and they are to attach themselves into an email and to move from an email to another, and they are here. Those ones, once they are considered to be an email virus, so they are to travel in between network devices. So they are to infect an environment, but because of the capability of, of being attached to an email program. So once an email is being sent from the sandbox, the virus, it will attach itself into that email and propagate across the platform. Even whatever the category of the virus. So here, the email viruses, actually they are the virus to be able to attach themselves into an email, because a virus that attach itself into an email, it might be even a macro virus. Might be even a macro virus. That's absolute, because the macro virus, once run in a computer, it will execute a payload. What does that payload do? It might attach itself into an email. So I hope this point is clear. I hope this point is clearly clear. And it has so many things to do. It's not only to propagate, but also it can execute group of commands. Remember that to eliminate the issues caused by viruses, better to prevent, not to detect. So the prevention is the best scenario any and every single digital solution user or owner has to think of. Prevention is better than detection. الوقاية خير من العلاج. So the prevention of what can happen, what can happen due to the execution of a virus is much more better to detect a run virus, because once a virus has run, means there are issues happened already. You have to check your digital environment for serious. So preventing a virus is much more appreciated and advised than detecting a virus. When we talk about the context of the detection, realistically, actually, we need some knowledge in order to behave, or the security appliance needs some knowledge to behave. When we talk about detection, we have to recognize what happened. If there is any penetration, if there is any file infection, if there is something actually being concealed or deleted or something like that. So there has to be a detection. After the detection of the behavior, there has to be actually an identification of the responsible process. Based on that, an action would be actually launched. Mainly you talk about removal, but not only, because a virus might be actually only put into a quarantine and not deleted, based on the scenario also. So detection, identification, and action here. I'm not going to say removal, but I want to say action. Yes. Um, in the context of the evaluation here, we have to recognize that when we described the file infectant, we said that the exe files, they are considered to be malware by whom? By antiviruses. The COM files, they are also considered to be malware by whom? By antiviruses. Okay, let me come back one step. The same scenario here, talking about the same scenario. The evolution only of a virus, and be considering that the exe files as they are all viruses and become viruses. Actually, can we attach? If I ask you the question, can we attach an exe file we generated and we created using a C++ program within the IDE and the Visual Studio? Can we attach the solution, the black screen that we, the black screen, the result of the C++ program into the Visual Studio? Sorry, into an email. The answer is no. the email will detect that it is an exe file and will declare it as a virus, as a malware. So it will be blocked immediately. Unless you do it manually. You do not just attach the exe and you try to share. But manually you can do that by how? How how you do it manually? You have to trick the email engine. But generally, file infectors, they are considered to be actually not to be attached into an email. And not to be attached into an email, what does it mean? It means there are considerations. The email engine does not know what a user is attaching is a virus or not. It does not know even because the number of the shares and the email sent per day, they are enormous. So do not expect that everything is to be seen by a human being or something like that. No. It is the criterions to be checked and the system will autonomously behave. We come to an example of the constraints to be considered for scanning and detecting antivirus just now. Okay, a scenario via which we analyze the behavior of an antivirus security mechanism. You have this list of tasks in the say steps. Sorry, inside the book. You just read that. You just read that. Okay. After understanding what does it mean a virus and how it behaves, the fact of blocking a virus from being run or from being accessed in your environment. Blocking a virus, what does it mean? You are going to stop the process that is carrying a virus. Whether it is running and you'll detect it, or from the beginning you'll deny its startup. Okay. The scenario which malicious software, or specifically we talk about the viruses to be detected. Step number one, actually, we have actually here 4 steps, but the step number one is to set up the group of policies to help the computer program, the security computer program, we say whatever it is, from running perfectly and detecting whatever it is meant to detect. So policies here too, policies to set, policies, step number one. Step number two, it is a scenario via which a malicious or malware succeeds in just trespassing a first filter, which is the firewall here. If it is visible here, so the malicious the software has sorry the, yes the malicious software has trespassed the security filter, and it has to. Otherwise, if it is blocked from there, خلاص, the security is set already. It is already blocked, so the security is set. Once the malware is exposed, or they say it is available in an environment where the administrators they are setting the policies, we are talking about a sandbox here. So that malware will be controlled. The sandbox here, or the list of policies controlling the environment where the virus is going to be detected. The malware will find a difficulty to run because of the list of the policies. It will not be able to run frequently. Much more severe than a firewall, the sandbox here in this case. And after this step, once a virus is detected, or let's say a malware is detected, so there will be an alert. There will be actually a claim, a declaration. We stop here at this level unless you have any questions. Otherwise, I'll take the attendance. Say yes if you're in there, please.